Hey, what's going on, guys? This is Chris here, and welcome back to another exciting episode of Chill Tennis Entertainment. In today's video, we're going to be discussing the effects of the Grand Slam race, and I'm going to be giving you my opinion on how I feel that this whole emphasis on which player is going to have the most Grand Slam titles won has really destroyed the future for the next-gen players, specifically for Carlos Alcaraz and for Jannik Sinner. Now, before we get into all that, I'd like to encourage you guys, if you're new to this channel, to please take a minute to hit the subscribe button down below. That'll, of course, keep you notified of any time we release additional content like this. And if you enjoy content like this, then please be sure to share this video with your friends. All right, guys, without further ado, let's get into it. In the year 2000, Pete Sampras wins his 13th Grand Slam title at Wimbledon. He defeats Patrick Rafter in the final, and then he shatters that record. He breaks it again in the year 2002, defeating Andre Agassi at what would be Pete Sampras' final Grand Slam title at the US Open. That was a big deal back in that time period. People were thinking, wow, 14 Grand Slam titles, that's never going to be broken, or it's going to take decades at least for someone to come along that could break that record. Well, as it turns out, it would only take about 7 years. And surprisingly enough, the guy that did it was already playing on the Pro Tour at the time when Pete Sampras retired. And of course, that player was Roger Federer. Roger Federer would win his 14th Grand Slam title at the 2009 French Open, defeating Robin Soderling. And then he would shatter Pete Sampras's record 1 month later, defeating Andy Roddick in the final. So, it was a huge deal again, because it was like, wow, this amazing record that took decades and decades to be set has finally been broken. And now in the same decade, the same 10-year time period, we've had another player come along and shatter it again. So it's like, wow, I mean, this is just amazing. And then Nadal would come along and he would start getting into contention for breaking Sampras's record. In 2014, he would tie it. And then a few years after that, Djokovic would tie it. So we've seen from Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic this incredible slam race of each of these guys getting to at least 20 Grand Slam titles. And people were wondering, who's going to win the most? Who's going to win the most? Is it going to be Federer because he's got this huge lead? But then Nadal is coming on really, really strong, and maybe he's going to pass Federer and he's going to win the most amount of Grand Slam titles. Or maybe it's going to be Djokovic because Nadal can't seem to beat Djokovic. And of course, we know Federer is getting older, so maybe Djokovic's going to be that guy who wins the most Grand Slam titles. And as it turns out, it was Djokovic. But it was Djokovic for a couple of different reasons from what most people would think. And those are reasons we're going to be getting into in this video, because they're critically important to understanding the future of this sport. Okay, so we're going to go into the 2010s now. We've got Nadal hot on the heels of Roger Federer. He's got to catch up to 16 Grand Slam titles. Roger Federer gets his 17th Grand Slam title at the 2012 Wimbledon Championships. I think at this time Nadal had about 10 or 11. So he's kind of slowly gaining on Federer, but Djokovic now is starting to win Grand Slam titles, and he's winning a lot of them. So people are thinking, well, maybe Djokovic could somehow get in there and win a bunch more. But no, I mean, a lot of people at that time thought these next-gen guys, when I say next-gen guys, I'm talking about the lost-gen players, of course, players born from 1989 through 1994. So Dimitrov, Raonic, Goffin, Thiem, those players. These guys are going to force out Djokovic at some point, right? Well, all these years later, we're still watching the lost gen. What few of them are left, and they never went on to really do anything. Dominic Thiem won 1 Grand Slam title. The other guys didn't win anything. And it's sad because that generation just completely collapsed. Now we get into the next gen, the proper next gen, if you will, okay? So that's players born from 1995 through the present, I guess, you know, meaning players that are still coming on tour right now. So born in the year 2004, 2005, it doesn't really matter, I guess. You could expand the next gen out as far as you want to. Okay, so we've got, for the next gen, Nick Kyrgios, we've got Daniil Medvedev, we've got Alexander Zverev, Stefanos Tsitsipas, Denis Shapovalov, Felix Auger-Aliassime, we've got Jannik Sinner, Carlos Alcaraz, and a whole bunch of other players. I don't probably want to try and pronounce their names on video because I probably won't get them all right, but a whole bunch of other guys. We get the idea with that. Now this group started getting into their primes all the way back in, let's say, the late 2010s. The older players in that group started getting in their primes back in the late 2010s. And all these years later, they have a combined amount of 5, I believe it is, Grand Slam titles that they've won. 3 by Alcaraz, 1 for Sinner, one for Medvedev. And that's it from the next gen group. And that's in the course of like 7 or 8 years. So that's terrible considering how much younger these guys are than Nadal and Djokovic. And they're both still playing. Djokovic is 37 years old. 37 years old. He is the oldest #1 player of all time. And the man was a set away from winning a calendar year Grand Slam last year. How is this possible that these next gen guys can't beat a 36-year-old Djokovic? I just can't wrap my mind around it. So again, you're getting into this question, why is it that these next gen guys can't win? Well, that's probably a bigger question and a more difficult question than I really have the time for in this video, but I'm going to give you a couple of reasons for why. Number one, the surfaces have really changed a lot. I mean, when I say the surfaces, I'm talking about the speed of the rallies. It has really changed a lot in the last 25 years, let's say, because going back to Wimbledon 1994, there was a big uproar over the Sampras-Ivanisevic match because it was a serve fest, and the casual fans didn't like it. And to be honest with you, it wasn't really a fun match to watch because Sampras would hit an ace, or he'd hit a service winner, or he would get up to the net quickly and there wouldn't be much of a rally, and there's just not a lot of excitement and anticipation on the return games because you know that in 95% of those games it's just going to be a pitcher's duel. So it's not going to be real exciting, and there's not going to be oh, Ivanisevic might get back into this game. No, it's pretty much if they lose a break, they're going to lose the set, and almost every set's probably going to go to a tiebreaker. It's that kind of a match. And there were a lot of matches like that. And I can understand why the casual fan, and even the hardcore fan, I should say, not the hardcore fan, would find that to be kind of boring. And it just got to a point where people said, no, we need to have a change. And I think that the Wimbledon officials made a good decision to slow the courts down. It's been pretty well documented that they started slowing the courts down in the early 2000s, maybe 2002, 2003, somewhere in there, when Leighton Hewitt, of course, won Wimbledon as a baseliner. That was a pretty unusual feat. It was also unusual to see David Nalbandian in that final, another baseliner along with him, but that's another story. In either case, so you see the court speed started to become more homogenized, and you're basically dealing with a speed that's going to be about the same regardless of what court you're playing on. It used to be back in the 90s, you know, you'd have slower clay courts, but you'd have very, very fast grass courts at Wimbledon, fast hard courts at the US Open, and then kind of moderately slow courts at the Australian Open. And they kept that for a long time, but in the 2000s they started slowing Wimbledon down more and more every year, and so it eventually started to kind of look like a clay court. And then they basically did the same thing at the US Open. That just took them a little bit longer to do that. And the Australian Open also continued along in that trend. It was a slow court back then. Today it's faster, so they've kind of changed things around a little bit. But to make a long story short, the reason that we've seen all of these next-gen guys struggle so much is because there hasn't been any major advents in the game. There's no new technology that's going to change things, that's going to give the younger guys a big advantage. You know, if you stop and think about it, when wood rackets went away in the early 1980s and players started playing with graphite, it changed the sport. You've got Boris Becker, who's the youngest Grand Slam champion, possibly, well, I don't think ever, but at that time he might have been at Wimbledon in 1985. And he comes out of nowhere, and he's got this amazing power that had never been seen before, and he starts winning Grand Slams. He was an early adapter to that graphite technology. So was Andre Agassi. So were a lot of other younger players. But the guys like McEnroe, who were more touch and feel, they really struggled when the technology changed from wood rackets to graphite, and it ushered in a big change in the game. Then if you go into the late 90s, early 2000s, you've got the advent of the multi-filament strings, so the players that could play amazing defense that maybe in 1989 or 1985 or 1991, they couldn't get that same amount of top spin on their shots. You know, they beat guys ranked 20 in the world. Well, now they're suddenly breaking through, and they're getting into 5 in the world and 1 in the world eventually, you know, with like Leighton Hewitt. And so that made a huge change in the game. It really changed the sport. It changed the way that players were thinking about constructing points. You see fewer and fewer serve and volleyers. You see more and more players adapting to the same playing style because it all works. All right, so now let's get into these young guys. Let's talk about them, and I'm going to be giving you my thoughts on why I don't think they can be all-time great players. Well, the first thing that I want to talk about with them is let's look at the field. Let's look at the players that they're having to face to win these Grand Slam titles. When Jannik Sinner won the Austrian Open this year, he faced Andrei Rublev in the quarterfinals. Again, Rublev's a guy who's never been to a Grand Slam final before, never been past the quarterfinals of a slam. He's got 36-year-old Novak Djokovic in the semis. That match took him 4 sets to win. 36 years old, and he's having to go 4 against Djokovic. And in the final, he has Daniil Medvedev. Medvedev takes him to 5 sets. Medvedev wins the first 2 sets. And Medvedev is a guy, again, who can't get the job done against 35-year-old Nadal and 36-year-old Djokovic. So what kind of a draw is that? You know, when you stop and think about it, if Sinner is really legitimately going to be considered a possible all-time great player, and he's beating a guy who can't get past the quarterfinals of the Slam, is 36 years old in the case of Djokovic, and doesn't win Grand Slam finals. I'm sorry to say that, but that's just the truth about Medvedev. He's only won 1 of them. That's just not very good. If we look at the big 3, okay, we've got Federer, Nadal, Djokovic. We'll throw in Andy Murray because he, you know, also had pretty good results. Murray was a fantastic player. Murray won 3 Grand Slam titles. He was always in the top group. He was always in the top 5. He was a player that won 2 Olympic gold medals, and he was a World Tour Finals champion. He had an excellent career. Go down a little bit, and we now have Stanislas Wawrinka, a 3-time Grand Slam champion, a guy that beat pretty much anybody that wasn't named Rafael Nadal or Roger Federer or maybe even Novak Djokovic. And then we've got players ranked below that. Juan Martín del Potro. Obviously, this guy would have had a much better career if he hadn't had those wrist problems, because he was beating Nadal and Federer at the Grand Slam level when he was only 20 years old. We go down to, and that was back-to-back, by the way. We go down to Marin Cilic, a Grand Slam champion, a player that probably would have had a better career if he moved a little bit more like Jannik Sinner. And then you've got a whole bunch of guys that didn't win Grand Slam titles but were truly great players. You've got Robin Soderling, Thomas Berdych, Jo-Wilfried Tsonga, Fernando Verdasco, Fernando Gonzalez, Andy Roddick, David Ferrer. Really, the list goes on, and you can even throw in some pretty good lower-ranked players like Fabio Fognini and Gael Monfils if you want to. There's a lot of players from this group. Think about all the matches that Nadal and Djokovic and Federer had to play against this quality group of players. Now, if we flash forward, we look at the next-gen guys, I'm at a loss to find any of them that are really on level with this group besides maybe Medvedev and maybe Zverev, okay? And Tsitsipas on a great day. And that's about it. I mean, these guys, these are the top players of this generation. So if you're beating these guys, you're beating the Casper Ruuds, you're beating the Stefanos Tsitsipases, you're beating the Zverevs, it's not going to make you the best because there's nobody out there to push you. to get you up to that level, so that you have to dig deep and say, what's wrong? Why am I losing to this guy? And keep pushing. There's nobody for Sinner besides Alcaraz. There's nobody for Alcaraz besides Sinner. That's the problem with today's game. When the best player and their biggest rival is a 37-year-old tennis player that's way past his prime, that's just unacceptable for guys in their early 20s. They shouldn't be having to deal with Djokovic. Djokovic should have been long out of the game. They should have other rivals, and the fact is they don't have that. That's the biggest problem with today's game. Let me know what you guys thought of this video. Thank you so much for watching today. I will see you at the next one.